Today's Monday, I have Renfair on Saturday, and I have not started to make my costume literally at all. So I'm going to spend all of this week smashing out a costume for Renfair. I have all of these fabrics behind me, and a dream. I think I can do it. I'm going to make a ranger themed outfit, so I'm just going to like throw a bunch of pieces together and hope that it all blends well, because I really don't have a plan, and I never do. I just wing it and hope for the best. Hello, I'm Harley or Classy Pollux, and I am a creator from Melbourne. I make costumes, I cosplay, that's it. Welcome to my channel. I post sewing videos occasionally, and thank you for checking out this video. I'm smashing out my Renfair look, and I'm gonna get it done. Literally the only plan I have right now is to make a Gambeson and make a couple of different cloaks. I have all of these stash fabrics that I'm going to use. I think all of these colors will work really well together. It's basically just greens and browns. But I want a really long cloak with a hood, and I want a short cloak, or a short little capelet, either with a hood or without a hood, depending on how I feel when I make it. Essentially, I just want a bunch of different shaped pieces, different style pieces, different textured pieces to make it all really work together. We're going to start making stuff basically straight away. First thing I'm going to make is the Gambeson, because I want to get that done first, and if that's the only thing that I make this week, that's totally fine. Yeah, I think this will be perfect for a Gambeson. I love everything about this fabric, and I think it'll be perfect for my little ranger. And I have some of this fabric, and I think this could be good for the lining. Then I have this giant doona of fabric, and I don't know what I'm gonna do with this. Maybe a full cloak out of this. I don't like the shade of green that it is for my ranger, and so I was thinking of dyeing it either a deep emerald or brown. And then this is just a bag of a bunch of scrap fabrics. So I'll leave this to the side for now, because I don't think I could make a full piece out of this. We'll leave it. We don't have to touch this right now. This can be towards the end when I'm like, okay, what do I do now? Next plan of attack is to go through my patterns and see what I can use and modify for this whole look. I have these patterns, and I was thinking I could use the shawl pattern on this and this long little cape thing. I have this like Game of Thronesy pattern, which I was thinking I could use and modify to make my Gambeson pattern, because I don't really have anything to base it on. And then I've got a couple of cape patterns. I was thinking of making this giant one out of that green blankety fabric and dyeing it brown, but also adding a hood, because I want it with a hood. So I think the first thing that I want to do is modify a pattern to make my Gambeson. Okay, so I actually can't find a good enough pattern that I like and want to use, so I'm just gonna drape all of it on this mannequin and hope for the best. I want it to be like a triangle down and make it pointy at the bottom. So let's draw some shapes and see what sticks. I'm not much of a pattern drafter, and I don't really do it often, but I thought for this Gambeson that I could probably figure it out. I am not the same size as this mannequin, obviously, as you can kind of tell. But even though this isn't really the right size for me, it totally works. I just modify it a little bit once it's off the mannequin. I just sketched the shoulder and neck seams and then go down from there, and then I added another bit of fabric over the top to make the two closure sides. Does that make sense? I don't think so. One's the left side and one's the right side, and one will go over the top of the other one. Neaten everything up with a bunch of ruled lines so that it's not completely messy. And yeah, I did use my Camp Half-Blood t-shirt because it was in my sewing room, just to make sure that the sleeve holes were the right size, because otherwise they would have been really small. But yeah, this mostly worked. Actually, I think it worked pretty well, so highly recommend using a t-shirt you already have and making sure everything's the right size. If you're looking at this and thinking, that's definitely the incorrect shape and not how it should look, it should jut out from the seam a little bit, you're absolutely correct, and I do fix this. But way later, it takes me a little bit to realize that that's what I needed to do in order to make this actually fit. Also, yes, this is just some scrap white fabric that I have, and no, I didn't iron it because I'm lazy. But you should always iron your fabrics before using them. Do as I say, not as I do type behavior. Definitely iron your fabrics. It's way easier to work with, and make sure everything actually fits correctly. But because this is a mock-up, I am lazy. Yeah, I put one side on top of the other side to match up the sleeve holes to make sure they're both the same size, and that worked, so huge W for me. And this is the fit of mock-up / pattern number 1, and I wanted it to be a little bit longer. It was a bit too short. It felt like a t-shirt rather than a Gambeson.
Yeah, I just added some length along that middle seam. Simple stuff. I used just a random pattern piece to make the shape of the back piece because I didn't want to pattern that myself, and this matched up pretty well.
Okay, so sort of mock-up pattern type thing done, but now I'm going to cut it out with a seam allowance so that I make sure it's actually the right size, and to see if there's any problems with the fit. But it actually looks pretty good on the mannequin, even though nothing's pinned, it's just kind of hanging there by friction. I'm also not sure if I make the sleeves detachable or attached. If I make them attached, it's going to be super thick right there, but if I make them detachable, it'll take longer. So we'll see what we do with that. But I'll test it all out, see if it all works and fits, and see how I like it. So yeah, let's cut it all out.
I actually don't think I added a seam allowance before sewing all of this together, but it didn't matter, I didn't really need one. Everything fit super well anyway, but probably add a seam allowance if you're gonna make your own stuff.
Okay, I think the fit down to like the waist is really good, but otherwise I think it's a little bit weird. I think it's just this piece that I need to fix. But yeah, otherwise it's pretty good.
I feel like I should have measured this, but I did just eyeball it. Finally figured out I needed to add a jut out from the side seam instead of just leaving it straight down. And then the back was too big, so I'm taking it in by about 3 centimeters, I think, and then that worked out perfectly for me. I still cut it out on the fold of the fabric just to make sure that it all looks good and fits correctly, and I can make any further adjustments later. I have truly an absurd amount of this white fabric, and so I use it for literally every mock-up and pattern designing just because it's easier and I got it for free. I want to make sure that everything fits correctly and perfectly so that I don't have to make any further adjustments. And then yay, sewing together one final mock-up.
Okay, ta-da! It's done! I think what I'll do is I'll add like 2 centimeters to this side and just make it not perfectly straight but a little bit across so that it gets tucked under here a little bit more. I'm going to test out the collar and the sleeves, make sure that they fit this pattern as well.
And the final mock-up with a sleeve attached, I didn't really like the length of this sleeve, so I just folded it up for the moment and then I made it a much shorter sleeve on the final look.
Okay, yay, mock-up fully done. I think I'm gonna make the sleeves about 3/4 because I didn't like the look of it full sleeve, so it's gonna be a shorter sleeve. I'm still undecided as whether I make it detachable or attached. Yeah, this means I can take this apart and cut out the main fabric. Really fun, so let's do that. Okay, I did forget, but I wanted this side to be the green and then this side to be a different color, and I don't know what color I should make it. So I'm gonna test out a couple of things and see which color I like. So this is the main Gambeson fabric, and then half will be a different color. I could do red, because I have a bunch of this red fabric. I could just do this emerald green, and then make a bunch of bias tape out of this and bias the edges with this green. I maybe have enough of this brown to do a brown side, but I don't know if I like these two colors together. Or I could use some of this and pair these two together. These two. But I'm not sure entirely. So I'm gonna leave that one half for the minute. Undecided. I can never make decisions. Someone needs to tell me what to do.
I did iron my mock-up pieces a little bit before cutting them out to make sure that they sat flatter than they did before because they were very wrinkly. They're still wrinkly now, don't worry about it. Yeah, I just used those white pieces as pattern pieces because they sit pretty flat and cut them out of my main fabric. And then I did decide to go with the yellow for the contrasting piece. And I added just a little bit of extra length to this piece as well. I wanted wadding behind this yellow piece to make it match the green quilted fabric more, so I just quilted it myself, drawing lines onto this yellow fabric so that I know where to sew down instead of just guessing when I sew, and it takes a little bit of time. And then the fun part of quilting that whole thing. And this actually was really fun. I really enjoyed this process because watching it all come together is so exciting. And the super exciting part of sewing together my main fabric. This was really fun, and honestly it was really easy to sew. I really liked it. I forgot I made some minor adjustments before cutting out the yellow fabric, and so I had to just trace around it to cut out the lining fabric. I used some leftover green fabric from a different project to make the lining of the Gambeson, and then I used this same fabric to make bias tape later. I'm really obsessed with how nice and neat this whole thing turned out. I love it so much already.
Okay, so at the moment I'm just putting pieces together and assembling it and seeing what matches and what fits. This is the vibe right now because I really love this like wraparound scarfy type thing. I wish I had enough to make like a mini cloak with a hood to attach this to, but I don't think that I do. I think this is fun. I don't know if I like this brown though, and I do have heaps of brown dye, so maybe I could just dump all of this fabric into that dye bath and see what happens. And yeah, just because I want to break up some of this green and yellow, because I don't like these two colors just by themselves. I think it's a little bit weird, but with the shirt underneath it actually looks fine. And I am thinking I will make the sleeves detachable because I put them on and I was like, I kind of like when there's a big gap here, so I was thinking of just making it attachable at the top and just bias taping these edges and the sleeve edges. And I have a bunch of leftover leather and suede from a couple other projects, so I'm thinking of making a couple pouches to sit at the hips. Maybe one at the back too, and attach it with a belt. I have plenty of belts to choose from, I just need to make sure that the loops that I make are big enough. I also have been playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 forever recently, and I really love they have these shoes with like little details around the top. Insert picture right here. That little detail I want to make on my shoes, so I'm just going to make a quick little pattern for that and attach it to the shoes. Probably just with safety pins on the inside, because I don't want to ruin the shoes.
Had to go goblin mode to cut out this green fabric because the cape was too big to cut out on the desk. I hate hunching over on the floor, my posture looks terrible.
Oh my god. That fabric was so thick. It was like a workout cutting it out. My hand hurts. Everything is warm.
Using this hood pattern piece I made years ago as a guide to make my hood piece, I just drew rough shapes and guessed, really.
Okay, good morning. I don't know if I want to make this fabric a foresty green or brown. I definitely have more green dye than I do brown dye, so I'm not sure how either one will go. I was thinking brown because it'll be a nice outer layer to break up the green a little bit.
This is my giant pot of brown dye and I'm dumping all of my green fabric in there. Yes, I should have been using gloves, don't worry about it. I'd put them on later, I promise. This tests patch came out such a beautiful color. I had two dye pots going, the big one is brown and the smaller one is green. I put almost an entire doona into both of these dye pots with no real plan of how I was going to use the fabrics for the final product.
These are the dyed fabrics. We have the brown fabric, and I'm thinking it looks too nice to use for a ranger cloak. I think it looks too pretty, and I should have known this when I have the fabric to be like, it's gonna look too fancy. Then we've also got this slightly olivey green one. I'm really not sure how this one came out olive because the other ones came out like a foresty, emeraldy type green. And then we have the emeraldy, foresty type green. And I'm not sure what to use these for, because again, they feel too expensive. If not, I'm thinking of doing just this thin brown fabric that was the lining of the bed and make it just this plain brown cloak, but with no hood. But then I'll do a hood in the green woolen fabric that I have, and then I will still have a hood, and that might look cute. I feel like this brown might look better though than the expensive fabric, even though I took all that time dyeing it and making sure it looked nice. Let's test out some things against the mannequin and see what we're gonna do.
Because I had no real plan of what I was making for this whole thing, I just put fabrics up against the mannequin to see what I liked. I really loved this leftover green wool fabric and I really wanted to use it in my final look.
It's over here now. What do we think? I kind of like the vibe of this. This is kind of a fun vibe. It might need a little bit more brown to balance out this brown, but we can fix that.
Me realizing I definitely didn't like this fabric up against the rest of it, and I wasted a whole bunch of time dyeing fabric.
Okay, so I think I'm liking this, so I think I will do this. I wish I'd picked all of the same color and just gone with that. Because why do I have yellow down here, and this green, and this green, and this green, and this brown, and nothing matches? Why'd I do that? Okay. well, let's sew the cape, I guess. I cannot be bothered with a lining, nor do I have the fabric for a lining for this cape, so I'm going to French seam it and then probably add some bias tape to hem it and finish the front openings.
I'm sad that I spent so much time dyeing that Duna fabric and then not actually using it, but I just felt it was too fancy and expensive looking for my little ranger, and I thought that this plain brown cape would match a little bit more. Now I have to think of a new project to use all of that brown fabric for. I could keep it as a cape, or I could turn it into something new entirely. I used a different leftover brown fabric to make like a fake bias tape for this. I say fake bias tape because I did just sew it in the same way you would sew bias tape, but I didn't do any of the ironing beforehand, which makes it a little bit more annoying to work with, but did get the job done a little bit faster. So it's definitely a lot easier if you just iron the bias tape, but I was lazy, as per usual. It's a very plain and simple cape, but I do love how it looks overall, and I think it matches the costume pretty perfectly. I really wanted to use this leftover green wool type fabric that I had because I think it matched really well, and so I turned it into like a little capelet type thing. I used the hood I cut out of the fancy fabric as a pattern piece because it was the right size, and this matched up with the seams perfectly somehow, so 10 out of 10. Also cut out a lining for this, and I used just a different leftover brown fabric that I had. I have a lot of green and brown fabrics in my stash. I need to use them up more. I probably shouldn't have used this fabric because it was really slippery, not to sew, but to wear. But I don't really mind because I do really love the color of it, and I love how it matches with this green that I chose. To make the little boot covers, I just eyeballed shapes and drew it onto some paper to make a little pattern. I used some plain white fabric as some lining, and then I used yellow fabric as the outer fabric, and measured that up against my boot to make sure it would all fit. I did go back and make these bigger because these tiny ones did not turn right sides out, and it was very difficult. If I had more time, I probably would have hand sewed them, but I didn't. I machine sewed them, and I don't think that it worked out super well, but that's fine. I'd like to make these again someday, but better. Yeah, so I made a whole one that was too small, and then went back and made one that was bigger. Well, I made two because I have 2 feet, but you get the gist. Then because I didn't sew them correctly, pressing these was a pain and they didn't sit completely flat, so I think hand sewing them would make them sit a lot flatter. And then I just safety pinned them to my boots. Using my phone as a guide to make sure that the pouch that I was making was going to be a lot bigger than my phone to fit phone, camera, wallet, keys in the pouch. I then made a mock-up out of some felt fabric just because I had so much felt left over from old projects and I have no idea where to use felt. But I think I might turn this felt pouch that I made into a satchel and use it in a later project, or just use it in a Renfair look and weather it a little bit to make it look more medieval and less clean, because I think it's a really good bag and I'm kinda sad I didn't use it for anything. I made this mock-up out of felt just because I had never made a bag before and I wanted to make sure that the shapes were correct before I cut it out of leather, because leather is much more expensive than felt. I obviously shrunk this pattern way down to make a pouch because this is huge.
Good morning, it's frickin' Renaissance fair time. It's time to get ready. I finished most of that stuff last night. I added closures to everything so I can put everything on and it stays secure. Isn't that a crazy concept? I don't think I've ever done that before. So I added 2 buckles at the top and the side of the Gambeson so that will stay on. I added a clasp to the cape. Was that it? It took like an hour and a half. I fixed a couple of joints on my leather armor that I'm gonna chuck on, and I made 1 pouch. So I would call this a huge success. I didn't get to weather anything, which is kind of sad, and I didn't make as many pouches as I wanted. However, I did get 1 done, and that's pretty good.
Okay, yay, let's go through this whole costume layer by layer. I made this shirt for a Shadow and Bone costume ages ago, and I use it as every single base ever. And then the pants I made ages ago for Oak, I use those as a fantasy base as well because I think these two match perfectly. Then we move on to the Gambeson. Here you can see all the closures and finishes I added off camera. Made little leather strips to do these and just hammered them into the fabric. Then I used little metal eyelets for the sleeves, and I just tied them together with some string. And I definitely recommend using something a lot stronger than that. But they didn't break when I was walking around all day, so I guess it worked. Instead of making a full collar, I also just added some bias tape around the collar because I think that that sat a lot better. And I added some bias tape to the sleeve edges as well, and I think that that looks really neat and tidy. I didn't even use the brown fabric that I dyed for this wraparound. I used a different set of scrap fabric because I thought that it matched everything a little bit better. So yeah, I dyed so much fabric just for fun, I guess. But yeah, I decided to use this piece of fabric because it was long enough to go around my neck and then tie at the back instead of just sitting loosely. And this is the little leather pouch I made. It's not perfect and it's not very good, but it does the job, so that's all that matters. I just attach it to the belt through these loops that I made, and this honestly works perfectly. I know it's messy looking, but it works, so I'm happy with it. I think in the future I will remake some pouches and make them a lot better, but I was kind of rushed for time at this point. Another layer of leather armor, I made these ages ago for a Percy Jackson cosplay, and now I use them for some medieval looks. The shoulder armor is also from the Percy Jackson cosplay. There's nothing quite like dressing yourself in a Renfair outfit to realize why people had squires and such to help them get into clothing. Putting some of this on was so difficult to do alone. Then we had the capelet that I made, and I did make a leather closure for this in the front, and it works perfectly. I think this capelet is so cute, and I love how it turned out. I'm kind of obsessed with it, actually. And then the final cape piece. I for some reason didn't add a closure to this, but I absolutely should have, because I wanted it to sit underneath the green hood. I just tucked it into my collar a little bit, and that sort of worked. It slowly slipped off, but that's fine. And here you can see the little boot covers I made. From afar they look really great, but close up they look a little messy. That brown tie fabric kind of looks silly from the back, but I don't really mind. I think maybe this hood was a little bit too big, but I think it works for a ranger. You can kind of like hiding in the shadows type vibe. Yes, this cape does need a little bit of a steam or an iron. Don't worry about it. I shoved it in my bag at the Renfair and forgot about it. But I do love how light and flowy it is. I think it turned out great. Overall, I really love this costume and I'm super happy with it. The fit is super nice and I think it looks really good even without weathering, but I think I'll add weathering to it someday. And that brings us to the end of the video. I want to thank you so much for watching and sticking around. I hope you had fun because I did, and I'll see you in another video. Okay, thank you, bye!